good morning, dear friends. Welcome to Torah Deep-Dive, another wonderful week. Hello, Marshall. And this week's Torah portion is Parshat Vayakhel. We are coming to the end of the book of Exodus. And in the book of Vayakhel is when Moses finally comes down from the mountain. And there's a lot of repetition, actually, in this week's Parsha and next week's Parsha. Because we've just learned everything, just about everything that's being spoken about in this week's Parsha has already been told to us a few parshas ago. It's about how to build a tabernacle. We got detailed instructions in the Torah of the building of the tabernacle, and it's all repeated again. Literally all repeated again. So, in fact, most commentaries on the Torah are, for the most part, silent in this week's Torah portion. Because, well, I've already commented, whatever I had to say, I already said it, last time we said all this stuff, and it's just the same verses over and over again, so no need to repeat. Which makes for a very compelling question. What's the Torah doing just repeating itself again? It's literally full-on repetition. And a lot of repetition. 2 full parshas of repetition. But basically before was when the Torah records God giving those instructions to Moses. And here we have Moses giving those instructions to the Jewish people. So it's the same content, just different messenger, different recipient of the message. But in any case, that is this week's Parsha. And I want to read with you the very opening words of this week's Parsha. And we'll begin our deep dive from the opening words of the Parsha. So take a look at page 3 on our handouts as we begin. And these are the very opening words of this week's Parsha, of Vayakhel. Let's read. It begins with the topic of Shabbos, interestingly. Moses gathered the entire Jewish people and told them, which means Moses comes down from the mountain. He says, I've got big news from God. God gave me a big job to do. We got to build a tabernacle. Let me share with you all the details. So Moses gathered the entire Jewish people and told them, these are what God has commanded to do. For 6 days you shall work, and the 7th shall be holy, a day of rest for God. Whoever works on this day shall die. Do not kindle fire in your encampments on the Shabbat. And then right away, with a little brief introduction about Shabbos, Moses goes into the actual main subject matter, which is building the Mishkan, building the tabernacle. Let's read. Let's continue. The verse continues right away. Moses told the entire Jewish people, this is what God commanded to say. Bring from among yourselves a donation for God. Every generous-hearted person shall bring God a donation of gold, silver, and bronze. Then Moses said to the Jewish people, see, God has chosen Bezalel, son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah. God has filled him with the Spirit of God, with wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, and with all kinds of skills to make artistic designs for work in gold, silver, and bronze, to cut and set stones, to work in wood, and to engage in all kinds of calculated work. And the Torah keeps on going with all the instructions and the dimensions, etc., for building the tabernacle. But this becomes a very critical piece here in the Talmud, that Shabbos is juxtaposed with the building of the tabernacle. In the Torah, juxtaposition is very critical. And one of the ways of how, one of the tools of how Jewish law is developed, one of the tools that Hashem told Moses is something called that sometimes we learn out laws by which laws are placed together. So if any 2 different laws are placed side by side in the Torah, it's an art to understand how to use this tool, but very often one set of laws teaches and informs the laws for the other set of laws, even though there doesn't seem to be any natural connection between them. But simply by virtue of the fact that they are put side by side, that itself makes this connection. So we have Shabbos, don't do work on Shabbos, and laws of the tabernacle. So the Talmud learns out many, many details about the laws of Shabbos between this juxtaposition. And the Talmud says like this. Number 1, the Torah says don't do work. Don't do work on this day. What's work? What's work? Are you allowed to sweat on Shabbos? What's the criteria? So the criteria is the laws of the Mishkan. And here we see how the juxtaposition informs us the laws of Shabbos. So number one, any form of work that was a part of building the tabernacle, that becomes forbidden work on Shabbos. Because don't do work, and here's do work. So that becomes, one informs the other. There's 39 categories of work that was a part of creating the tabernacle. Each of those 39 categories is what is prohibited to do on Shabbos. That's one example. Another example, take a look at the bottom of page 3. When Moses is introducing the making of the Mishkan, he says, look at the very last line, to engage in all kinds of calculated work. Calculated work, which means the work of creating the Mishkan was not cheap labor. It was creative labor with a lot of intentionality, with a lot of attention to detail. And that is the work of the Mishkan. So if the work of the Mishkan is calculated work, is creative work, intentional work, that is the type of work that is prohibited on Shabbos. Which means, the Talmud learns from here that in order for work to be prohibited on Shabbos, there has to be creative intentionality. If he didn't intend to do it, even if a form of work was done, you did not violate the Shabbos. What's an example of this? One of the areas of work which is prohibited to do on Shabbos is to plow the ground, plow a field. Now, I don't know when was the last time you plowed a field. I don't think I ever had to plow a field. But at the same time, the laws of plowing are relevant. Are you allowed to dig? Are you allowed to make a little trench? That itself, you're not allowed to do gardening for that reason. Even just moving ground to plant a flower, it's not major work. It's creative work. It's creative work. You can't plow. That's one of the 39 categories. Now, let's say you just want to move a bench. You're moving a bench in your backyard, or you're moving a heavy wooden chair, and you move it. And you look back, you're like, uh-oh, what did I just do? I just made a ridge. I just made a little dig in the ground. Now, that form of creating a ridge or something in the ground is a violation of the work of Shabbos. But when you pulled the chair, when you pulled the bench, did you have in mind to do that? Did you do that with intentionality? Did you do that with creativity? No. All you wanted was to move a chair from here to there. Next thing you know, you ended up doing the act of plowing on Shabbos. Says Jewish law, no problem. You're not liable. No problems. Why not? Because it's not creative work. It's not calculated work. You didn't mean to do it, so no harm done. And this introduces us to the idea, which we're going to be talking about today, intentionality in when we do a mitzvah, the lack of intentionality, and so too when we do something wrong, when we do something which the Torah tells us not to do, when we transgress. What happens if we didn't have intentionality? Is it still a problem? Is it not a problem? And what we're going to see here is that there's actually a very different standard when it comes to a mitzvah and when it comes to a sin. We don't have the same standards by either, and the Rebbe is going to wonder about that because it actually seems a little bit counterintuitive. Let us begin learning on page 4 what the Rebbe says. Such a beautiful teaching today. Page 4. Regarding the law that an unintended violations are exempt from punishment, there is a disagreement among the halachic authorities. The She'iltot is one of the earliest works post-Talmud, which speaks about practical Jewish law. So the She'iltot maintains that this exemption only applies in the laws of Shabbat. Oh, so the She'iltot says that this clause, that if you didn't have any intention, you're not liable, you're totally exempt, that's only for Shabbos. Why? Because the Torah explicitly says that in the context of Shabbos. So it's not across the board. It's a Shabbos-specific law. Let's continue reading. There is a unique clause in the laws of Shabbat which says that only calculated actions are forbidden, and if a violation wasn't the person's actual intention, the act doesn't qualify as calculated. But in other areas of Jewish law, the She'iltot maintains that even if the violations wasn't one's express intention, he is still liable for the act. So here's the basic question. When it comes to the laws of Shabbos, we have this rule. It needs to be calculated actions. Calculated, deliberate, intentional actions. Creative actions. If you didn't mean to do it, you didn't violate the Shabbos, because the Torah clearly says there it has to be creative, calculated acts. And the question, of course, is, 1 second, is that a law exclusive to Shabbos violations, or is that a law across the board? She'iltot, which is perhaps the earliest printed text of a rabbi applying Jewish law, he says, no, listen, that's a special clause for Shabbos. Anything else, any other area of Jewish law where Jewish law tells you not to do something, I don't care if you didn't mean to do it. If you did it, you are liable for punishment. But, says the Rebbe, however, most halachic authorities disagree with She'iltot and are of the opinion that unintended violations are exempt from punishment in all areas of Jewish law. So if there's any area of Jewish law, you did something by mistake, you didn't mean to do it, no harm done, no punishment. So let's say you by mistake ate non-kosher. So if you intended, you went and you bought something non-kosher, you said, it's okay, I'm not going to eat kosher today. Okay, that's you had in mind to do a sin. You ate it, you knew it, you bought it, you ate it, okay. But let's say you were under the impression it's kosher, and you eat it, and all of a sudden afterwards you find it's not kosher. What's the law? The law is no harm done. That's the consensus of halachic authorities, that if there's no intention when it comes to a sin, no harm done at all. So we see that for a sin, for a transgression, to count, you need to have meant to do it. Which means we have a high standard. You did something by mistake, no problem done at all. Now let's talk about mitzvahs. What about a mitzvah? Do we say the same thing about a mitzvah? Let's say you did a mitzvah by mistake. Let's say a Chabad rabbi harassed you to shake a lulav, but you didn't even want to do it, you didn't mean to do it, but you did it anyways. Did you do the mitzvah? Interesting question. We have one standard. When it comes to a sin, to a transgression, to the prohibitive mitzvahs, you need to have intentionality. No intention, the act doesn't count. What about a mitzvah? Continues the Rebbe. Do mitzvahs require intent? Bottom of page 4. Hi, Shelley. How you doing? Good morning. Regarding positive mitzvahs, there is a disagreement about whether intent is required in order to fulfill them. The consensus conclusion is that there are some types of mitzvot that are fulfilled even if a person did them without mitzvah intent. Moreover, there are some mitzvot that even if a person was compelled to do them against his will, he has still fulfilled the mitzvah. So we basically have this question. What happens if you do a mitzvah, you didn't mean to do it? So there's a debate about this, like everything in Judaism. There's a lot of colors to the table. We have to understand everybody's position. But the consensus ultimately is that for most mitzvahs, you don't need intent. And the mitzvah still counts. Even more so, if somebody forced you to do the mitzvah, you get the mitzvah. Which is a very interesting type of scenario. Let's read this right now in the Code of Jewish Law. Page 5. We'll see this from the Code of Jewish Law. This is a quote from the Alter Rebbe's Code of Jewish Law. Source number 2. He says like this. All mitzvahs require intent in order to fulfill the obligation of doing that mitzvah. Which means ideally, you do a mitzvah, do it with intent. That's the ideal, of course. But if one did it without intending to fulfill his obligation, but let's say somebody did it without intent, doing it in passing, or with a different intent, not for this mitzvah, which means you're doing an act with it, which is a mitzvah, but you mean to do it for a different reason. Which means you happen to also have done a mitzvah, but that you want to do it for a different purpose. Says the Alter Rebbe, they have not fulfilled their biblical obligation. Okay, one opinion is you didn't do the mitzvah. But others say that mitzvos do not require intent. And even when done in passing, one has fulfilled their obligation post facto. And that becomes the law. The law is that the mitzvah does not need intent. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have intent. Ideal is to have intent. But if a Jew does a mitzvah and he didn't mean to do it, maybe even did it for his own ulterior motives, but he did the act, Most mitzvot, very few mitzvot need specific intent. Most mitzvahs, the act was done. And we're seeing over here how there's a very, very opposing standard when it comes to a mitzvah and when it comes to a sin. A sin, you need to have intent. No intent, no sin. When it comes to a mitzvah, most of the time, even if you have no intent, you still got the mitzvah. So we see a little bit of an inconsistency over here. Okay, yes, Marshall. You got to unmute. There you go.
So can you interpret that as if the mitzvah is doing something that benefits someone else, that if you didn't intend it, God made you do that mitzvah because he's helping the other person. You were like collateral.
But what about a mitzvah that doesn't help anybody else?
That's a different.
We're not making any difference over here.
But could you possibly?
So first of all, how to interpret this? We're gonna see from the Rebbe how to interpret this. But let's read the next text, which is interesting. The laws of Passover. We're coming up to Passover soon. Source number 3. This is from the Code of Jewish Law, the laws of Passover, and it's specifically about the mitzvah to eat matzah. Let's read. One who ate matzah without intent, meaning he did not intend on fulfilling his obligation by eating this matzah, he has fulfilled his obligation. If you eat matzah by mistake, imagine there's a Jew, doesn't even know it's Passover. He happens to buy matzah because that's what a store is selling. He's like, all right, I'll eat it. It happens to be Seder night. He doesn't mean to do any mitzvahs. He's eating it just for dinner. He's putting some jam and cheese on his matzah. Nice cracker, he ate matzah. But it happens to be he's eating matzah on the night that there's a mitzvah to eat matzah. Did he do the mitzvah? Says the Code of Jewish Law, he did the mitzvah. It's an amazing thing. He doesn't know it. He'll never even know it. But he got the mitzvah. Now, to Marshall's point, this is not a case where you benefited somebody else, so, at least good was done. You ate matzah. There's no physical benefit happened in this world. No practical benefit happened in this world. But the mitzvah was done. Okay, continuing. Therefore, even if he did not wish to eat matzah, and Gentiles or bandits forced him to. Interesting anti-Semitism. We're forcing you to eat a matzah. A bandit puts a gun to your head, eat matzah tonight. He has fulfilled his obligation. Because even unwillingly, his body benefited from it. Meaning the fact is your body ate matzah. And the mitzvah is that your body should eat matzah. Did you eat matzah? Yes, you got the mitzvah. You didn't mean it? Okay. You still did it. But the Rebbe says, one second, we're seeing over here how there's a totally different standard, a double standard, when it comes to positive mitzvahs and when it comes to prohibitive mitzvahs. Positive mitzvahs, even if you have no intent, the deed was done. Prohibitive mitzvahs, you need to have intent. If you didn't have intent, it's no sin. So, why that discrepancy? Let's read. Bottom of page 5. Says the Rebbe, with regards to intent, there is a difference between positive and negative mitzvahs. With a negative mitzvah, if the actor had no intent to transgress, he did not violate any prohibition at all. However, a person who performed a positive mitzvah without intent has fulfilled the mitzvah. And now the Rebbe says that actually seems to be the opposite of what logic should dictate. Logically, it should seem easier, it should seem more natural to do something wrong than to do something right. Let's explain that for a second. What is more natural to us as regular mortal human beings? Let's be honest with ourselves. To do something selfish, to do something materialistic, to do something a little bit lustful? Or is it more natural to be spiritual and to connect to God and to do something altruistic? Which one comes more natural to the human condition? I think if we're going to be honest with ourselves, I think we'd all agree. Even though we're all very, very good people, but we've all got very, very healthy animal souls. And yeah, being selfish and doing things which maybe are wrong morally or wrong spiritually, but seem to be just a little bit more pleasurable or more convenient, that comes more naturally to us. So if you want to be very honest with ourselves, what is more natural for the human consciousness, for the human psyche to do? More natural is a prohibition. Less natural is the mitzvah. So if anything, says the Rebbe, think about it. a sin should still be a sin, even if it's done unintentionally. Because at the end of the day, that's a more natural thing for a human to do. So even if there wasn't conscious intention, but subconsciously, it makes sense that we gravitate towards sometimes poor decisions. But connecting to God, that seems very unnatural. That seems something which has to be a very intentional, creative, calculated act. It would seem that a mitzvah should be the thing that demands intentionality, and the sin is still a sin even without intention, because that's just more naturally where the human conscious goes. And yet, it's the other way around. The mitzvah, it's easier to do a mitzvah than to do a sin, because to do a mitzvah, all you got to do is do it, even if you don't think it. To do a sin, you have to do it and think it. So Rebbe says, but really, logically speaking, it should be the other way around. Interesting question, no? It's counterintuitive. You understand the question? It's an interesting type of question. Interesting line of reasoning. Let's read. Page 6. Ask the Rebbe, separation from holiness should be easier than a connection. Says the Rebbe, this difference requires explanation, because seemingly the reverse should be true. A mitzvah, what's a mitzvah? A mitzvah is a connection. The effect of a mitzvah is that the person performing it and the physical items used to perform it become connected to God. A mitzvah is how we and the stuff that we use, we incorporate to do the mitzvah, we connect that with God. A transgression has the opposite effect. It disconnects the person and any associated physical items from godliness. So a mitzvah connects to Hashem, a sin separates from Hashem. Where are we more naturally? Are we more naturally connected to Hashem, or are we more naturally connected to physical life? The Rebbe says, before being associated with the performance of a mitzvah or with a transgression, which means what is the neutral state of everything in this world? What's the natural state of everything in this world? All physical things fall under the category of kalipat noga. This is a term we use in Tanya. Everything in this world is separated from God, but it has the potential to be connected with God. So it's like neutral, but it's not holy. Nothing is holy on its own. When you do a mitzvah with it, you can make it holy. But naturally, everything in nature is kalipat noga, which means it's just naturally separated from God. Says the Rebbe, this category is mostly negative. So all physical things are naturally closer to negativity than holiness. In fact, the nature of our physical world is that everything has more of a relationship with materialism than with holiness. It therefore appears logical that it should be easier to detach something physical from godliness than to connect it. Which one should be easier? Which one is a more natural, seamless thing to do? To disconnect something from God or to connect something with God? Says there, a connection to God should be much more difficult. It's a lot more unnatural. It's a much bigger imposition on the natural state of anything in nature. So the Rebbe asks, how then is it the case that detaching requires actual intent, while connection can be achieved even unintentionally? It doesn't make sense. It should be a bigger leap. It should be a more difficult thing to do a mitzvah. To make a connection with God, with yourself, and with things in this world, that's a much harder thing to do. You're trying to build a bridge between this tremendous gap, physical things with God. But for things in this world to just be disconnected from God, that seems the more, there's no bridge to be made over here. So the Rebbe says, why is it that in Jewish law, it is harder to do a sin, and it's easier to do a mitzvah? Logically speaking, it should be the other way around. It's a very fascinating question. Continues the Rebbe, page 7. But nevertheless, even though it seems counterintuitive, we are told that a mitzvah can be performed even without intent. And moreover, sometimes a mitzvah can be performed even against the person's will. You didn't even want to do it. Somebody forced you to do it. You still got the mitzvah. Regarding the mitzvah of charity, the Talmud relates how Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai compelled verbally his nephews to give charity. Did they get the mitzvah? He forced his nephews to give charity. Did they get the mitzvah? They got the mitzvah. Even if you're forced to do it, which means it's so easy to do a mitzvah. You don't have to have any intention, but a sin you have to have intention. So let's read the story from the Talmud. Very interesting piece of Talmud. On source 4, from the Talmud Baba Batra. Rabbi Yochanan saw in a dream that his sister's sons needed to lose 700 gold coins over the next year. So he saw that fate had it, that this family, the sons, they're going to lose 700 gold coins. So what did he do? He was a good uncle. He compelled them throughout the year to give money to charity. He just pressured them. And I'll give them a little bit of charity. He'd say, no, not enough. I need more money. I have a very important charitable cause. And they're like, you're choking us. I don't care. You got to give me money. At the end of the year, they were left with only 17 out of those 700 coins, which he didn't manage to get them to donate. So in their mind, he was being a difficult uncle. Every day, every week, he's hounding them. I've got another charitable cause. I need stucker from you. We've given you 100 of gold coins. We've never given this amount of charity. Stop already. No, got to give me more. He literally harassed them. The day before Yom Kippur comes, a year later, and the Caesar sent agents to seize 17 coins for taxes. They were sued by the government, and how much did they owe? 17 coins. Rabbi Yochanan told them, do not worry that they will take more from you. They only took the 17 remaining coins, which means I saved you. The 683 coins that I got you to give to charity, you anyways would have to lose by this time, by Yom Kippur of this year. But what would be better? If the government took your money for taxes, or if you gave that money to charity? So I helped you, at least you got a mitzvah with it. And the other 17 coins, don't worry about it. They sued you, they took 17 coins. The decree was only they have to lose 700 coins this year. So they were shocked, his nephews. They say, how do you know? They asked him. He said, I saw it in a dream. He answered them and told them his dream. So a very fascinating story. But the point is, you can ask a question now. Did Rabbi Yochanan's nephews get the mitzvah of giving tzedakah? They gave a lot of tzedakah. Almost 700 gold coins. Yeah, they got the mitzvah. The Talmud says they got the mitzvah. The mitzvah was done. Continues the Rebbe on page 8. We even find that the mitzvah of charity can be fulfilled without a person's knowledge. Which means you could... this is the example that Marshall gave. You totally didn't mean to give charity. It was a total mistake, but you got the mitzvah. Let's read. The law is that if a person loses a coin and a poor person finds it and derives sustenance from it, the one who lost it has fulfilled the mitzvah of charity, since ultimately he provided the poor person with sustenance. This creates a connection with God, even though the person had no intent or knowledge. A physical act without any spiritual element. So you did a physical act. There's no spirituality in your act. You put no spiritual energy into your act through intention, but you did the mitzvah. So imagine the pain. Imagine you have an envelope, and you just took out of the bank $1,000 cash. You put it in your pocket, and you come home, it's not there. And you're stressed. You're having a bad day right now. But meanwhile, a Jew who's in need found it, and the Jew he didn't mean to steal it. He tried seeing if there's any identifying. Is there a name or an address on the envelope? There's nothing. A blank envelope, $1,000, and he's low on rent that month. A single mom finds it, and she's able to pay her rent. You've got a very big mitzvah, even though you're in a bad mood, and you'll never know about it, but you've got the mitzvah. That's what Jewish law says. Let's read the next source, which is where the Rebbe gets this from. What Rashi's comment on source 5. Rabbi Elazar, son of Azariah, says, when you are cutting your produce in your field, and you forget some in the field, which means this is the ancient version of dropping $1,000, right? You're cutting the field and you just drop something by mistake. The verse says, for this you shall be blessed. The Torah blesses one who unwittingly did a mitzvah. You drop something in the field. A poor person comes and sees already cut grain. It's going to go to waste. He could tell that no one's gathering it. And he says, okay, now I have a little bit of food to bring home. I can make myself some challah for Shabbos. You shall be blessed. It's an amazing thing. You got such a special mitzvah. Meanwhile, what did you do? You did nothing. You forgot a thing in the field. Continues Rashi, from here we can say that if a person was carrying a coin in their clothing and it fell out and was found by a poor person, God rewards him. So it's an amazing thing. No intention is needed for a mitzvah. Even the opposite of intention is good enough. It was done totally by force or totally by mistake. But the amazing thing is that is not the standard we apply when it comes to a transgression, a negative mitzvah. Marshall, you got a question? Yes. You got to unmute.
If a poor person finds a briefcase with valuables in it, but no identification, is that person still not supposed to go to the police and say, I found this, I don't know who the owner is, and let the police look for it? Just can't say God rewarded me because I'm poor.
So there's a massive area of Jewish law, which is laws if you find a lost item. And the essence of the law is that if this is something which could be identified by its owner, which means it does have some form of distinct markings on it, like a piece of jewelry, which the owner will be able to say it looks specific like this and not that, then you have to try to find the owner, and you can only keep it if all your efforts to try to identify the owner failed. But with money, and the Talmud goes through this in depth, you can look this up, this is in the tractate Baba Metzia, the laws of lost objects. The Talmud tells you exactly what type of objects you could keep right away, which means there's no point of even looking because there's no way for anybody to identify it, which means you can't find the owner. And if somebody comes and says it was mine, how do you know that this is the actual real one? There's no way to prove it either way. So that's a case-by-case basis. But the basic idea that, especially lost just a coin fell, a very precious coin, a gold coin fell out of your pocket, and a poor person finds it. It's a random coin in the middle of somewhere, in the middle of the center of town. There's no way to find the owner for that. He's allowed to keep it.
Okay.
Yes, Polina.
Don't get a mitzvah.
Maybe you don't get the mitzvah. Maybe then you don't get the mitzvah. Although maybe giving tzedakah sometimes, you never know who needs tzedakah. Some people. But in any case, the point is that's not the point. So the point is that you didn't mean to do anything, and yet you're getting a mitzvah. Now you'll never know it. To your point, Polina, you'll never know it. Who found it? Maybe nobody found it. Maybe a bird ate it and is going to die because of it. I don't know. Anything could happen. It's. But the point is, if tzedakah was done totally unintentionally by you, and if anything, you're just upset and stressed that you lost the money, but you got the mitzvah. But yeah, it's a massive subject in Jewish law, and if you want, I very much encourage you to go check it out, the laws of returning lost objects, and what is your duty, to what extent. It's a fascinating and very detailed area of Jewish law. Let's continue, dear friend. Bottom of page 8. Yeah, we're good. We can continue.
But does it help to think that maybe it was found by a person who needs it? Does this thinking after the fact qualifies as an intent?
It's definitely a good thing that when something bad happens, you should think that it was divine providence, it was hashgacha pratis, right? And that everything happens because Hashem wanted it to happen. But you don't know if a mitzvah happened because of it. There's no way to know. The point is, you don't even need intent. It's definitely a good thing to know that, you lost something, it was all for the right reason. But what's the reason? Is it tzedakah or is it a different reason? Maybe it was that fate had it that you had to lose $300 this year. And if you didn't lose it because it fell out of your pocket, you would be mugged. Maybe, you don't know if it's because of a mitzvah. There could be 3 million reasons why God decided you need to lose $300. One reason could be it's for tzedakah, and maybe you're upset about it. But it doesn't matter. The deed was done. Okay, but continuing, let's continue here. Bottom of page 8, the Rebbe continues, but the standard does not apply when it comes to an unintentional transgression. Says the Rebbe, regarding transgressions, however, even though material matters are naturally separated from godliness, and a physical act of transgression was performed with them, but halacha says, since the transgression was unintentional, it has no effect. Somehow, you had no intention, no effect. Not only is the person exempt from punishment, but even a transgression is not considered to have occurred, and the action has no negative metaphysical effect at all. Which means the Rebbe says sometimes you don't punish somebody, but the damage was done. Like maybe one of your kids are going to drop something very, very expensive. Your favorite mug, which is sentimental to you, you told your kid by mistake they dropped it and it broke. So you could tell your kid, listen, I'm not going to punish you. It was a mistake. But between me and you, the damage was done. The Rebbe says, according to Jewish law, not only they don't punish you for an unintentional sin, we don't even consider it like any damage was done. Nothing happened here. Nothing happened here. No damage. No spiritual damage was done by a sin. Usually a sin creates spiritual damage, creates spiritual harm to your soul, to the world. It's not a good thing. But if it was done unintentionally, no damage done. I want to skip source 6 because it's a little bit of an involved text and I want to make sure we're not running out of time. So let's jump straight to the bottom of page 9 where the Rebbe continues. And if you join our tiny class, most of you do, yeah, all of you do, we just learned source 6 at the end of chapter 24. So we're familiar with the basic idea. Says the Rebbe, bottom of page 9, the Alter Rebbe states in Tanya that the punishment, any Torah punishment, is commensurate with the negative metaphysical effect of the transgression. Something bad happened, the punishment always fits the crime, fits the damage. Therefore, logic tells us, the Rebbe says, the absence of any punishment proves that the act had no effect at all. For had there been some effect, there would have been at least a light punishment. Which means no punishment indicates to you that there's no damage here. Seemingly, says the Rebbe, the reverse should be true. It's a very simple logic. The Rebbe says it doesn't make sense. The Torah is telling us something very profound. It's saying that when a Jew does a mitzvah, it is actually more natural than when a Jew does a sin. Because a mitzvah, even no intention, we consider that it happened. But for a sin, you have to have intention. But the Rebbe says, seemingly, logic should dictate that it should be the opposite. It is in fact easier. It is more natural for us to do a sin. It's the more natural state of reality to be disconnected from God. To be more plugged into just your own egos, to your own desires. So seemingly, it should be considered a more natural and a more seamless act to do a transgression. And it should be considered a more harder or more creative act to do a mitzvah, to make the connection with God. And the Rebbe says, but Jewish law says the opposite. But what's the logic behind Jewish law? And this teaches something very, very profound. And dear friends, now that we've built up all of our background, now we could have the Rebbe's insight. And this is such a beautiful idea. Page 10 says the Rebbe, the explanation. Here's the explanation. At the beginning of the day, every Jew connects themselves to God through reciting Modeh Ani and other prayers. The first prayer that a Jew should say when they wake up is Modeh Ani, where we thank Hashem, we thank God for giving us our souls back. And the moment the Jew prays in the morning, they say Modeh Ani or a different prayer, it creates a connection with Hashem. And this forges a connection with God that lasts all day. Oh, says the Rebbe, therefore, even if the individual later performed the mitzvah act without any intent, that act is infused with the connection with God forged at the beginning of the day. Meaning, there was intention. What was the intention? That when you woke up, you said Modeh Ani, which set the tone for the day that you are making a connection with Hashem. And therefore, even if it happens to be that a few hours later you did a mitzvah without any intent, but the whole day is within the spirit of the Modeh Ani. So really, a Jew is always having good intent, even if he doesn't have it in the moment. And the Rebbe says this is an idea we actually see in Jewish law. Continues the Rebbe. This is similar to a law regarding consecrating a woman for marriage. If a man and a woman were talking about marriage, and in the middle the man gave the woman a valuable item, without explicitly saying that it is for the purpose of consecrating her for marriage, the woman is still consecrated to be his wife. Okay, let me give you some background. In Jewish law, some of the most sensitive areas of Jewish law, where Judaism is extremely particular about, is marriage and divorce. A marriage has to be done very properly, and there can't be any doubts about marriage, because there are a lot of high stakes in marriage. The moment a man and woman enter a relationship, they become prohibited to have relations with other people in the world, to have intimate relations. So, are they married? Are they not married? We're changing the status of people here. A divorce. There can't be doubts if this woman is divorced. If she is divorced, that means she could go and marry and be intimate with another man. If she's not divorced, then it's a very serious prohibition for her to be intimate with another man. So these areas of Jewish law are extremely, we're very precise about it. How do you create the act of marriage according to Jewish law? The moment of consecration, of creating the act of marriage, happens under the chuppah when the man gives the wife a valuable item, usually it's a ring, and says, I hereby betroth you. I hereby consecrate you with this ring. And we traditionally say according to the religion of Moses. The tradition of Moses and of the Jewish people. So when I stood under the chuppah with Mushki, I gave her a ring. She held out her finger. I slipped it on. And I told her in Hebrew, which are the words of that halacha says, Harei at mikudeshetli, hereby you are married to me, bit tabat zu, with this ring, kadat Moshe Yisrael, according to the religion, the tradition of Moses and Israel. That is the moment marriage happens. Two witnesses, which are kosher witnesses according to the Torah, have to be standing and witnessing, and they have to sign a contract that they've personally witnessed the marriage, and that's so it's serious business. Same thing with a divorce. Now imagine somebody gives a woman a ring and doesn't say anything. Is that a marriage? Is that a marriage? Meaning a marriage is made by a man giving a woman a ring with the intention to create a marriage. But what happens? He does it and there's no words. Is that a marriage or not? Does she need a divorce or not? It's a very serious question. So the Talmud says like this. Is it random? Like did a man just randomly give a woman a ring? If it was random, that's not considered a marriage. But let's say they've been discussing marriage. They didn't talk about it right now, but let's say this morning they were speaking about it. Let's get married. Yeah, that's such a great idea. And then he happens to gift her with a ring. Yes, that will be considered according to Jewish law the act of marriage. And if he says, no, I didn't mean to get married to her, you just got yourself in a lot of deep water. Go get a divorce. It's serious business. Meaning the fact that you were speaking about it earlier, even though now there was no explicit intent, but it set the tone. And the Rebbe says we're going to apply that same logic to Modani. A Jew says Modani, they're creating a connection with God. Later they do a mitzvah with no intent, but they were speaking about it already. It set the tone. That's the way Jewish law works. So the Rebbe very interestingly is connecting dots over here from the laws of marriage to the laws of intentionality with a mitzvah. Only the Rebbe knows how to do these things. Unbelievable connections from all across Torah and brings it together. So here's the piece of Talmud, bottom of page 10. From the Talmud, Tractate Kiddushin, which is the laws of marriage. And the Talmud says like this. One who was discussing marriage or divorce with a woman, meaning the same logic applies also to divorce. And then he gave her a bill of divorce, or he gave her a wedding ring, without explicitly stating his intent. Rabbi Yossi says it is sufficient. Okay, but Rabbi Yehuda says, in the name of Shmuel, that this is only when they were discussing that subject. So, and this is the law. The law is that if they were speaking about it, then there's no need for verbal intent. If it was random, then it's not considered marriage. So the Rebbe says, continuing on page 11, this is the case only for positive mitzvot. Which means, because we say modani, we're already discussing a connection with God. So when we do a mitzvah, the intent is there already. But for transgressions, however, says the Rebbe, if the person didn't expressly intend to violate a prohibition, the action isn't a transgression. Why? Because such a non-purposeful act is like a body without a soul. It's a dead action. Nothing happened here. In addition, says the Rebbe, as a result of saying modeh ani and the like at the beginning of the day, we have at least a subconscious intent contrary to the transgression. Which means the moment the Jew says modeh ani, they're saying, I want to be connected to God. And at least subconsciously they're saying, and I don't want to be disconnected from God. So therefore, the Rebbe says, not only is there a lack of intent when a Jew does a sin, there's a subconscious anti-intent. That the Jew says, I really don't want to do it. I know I'm doing it, but I actually don't want to do it. Why? Because we said modeh ani. It's an affirmation that I want to be connected to God. And the Rebbe says, all authorities all halachic authorities, even those who maintain that mitzvot don't require intent, concede that if a person had a specific intention not to fulfill a mitzvah, then they haven't fulfilled it. And the same should be true for transgressions. Intention not to transgress should mean that the act can't be considered a transgression. Which means, until now, we're speaking about the idea of if somebody forces you to do a mitzvah. You didn't even know you were doing a mitzvah. But you had zero intention, but you did the act, you ate matzah, you did the mitzvah. But let's say you eat matzah and you specifically have in mind, I don't want to do the mitzvah by eating this matzah. I'm eating matzah on Passover night, but I don't want to do the mitzvah. Okay, listen. If you specifically have intent that you don't want to have the mitzvah, there's no way this act could be considered a mitzvah. Which means no intent is okay. But anti-intent, I'm sorry, that's too much. So it's the same thing should be for transgression. If you have in mind, I don't want to transgress, even when you transgress, it shouldn't be considered a transgression. And when a Jew says Modani in the morning, they're saying, I want to be connected to God. And at least subconsciously they're saying, and I don't want to be disconnected from God. Therefore, even when a Jew transgressions, there's always the element of anti-intent. And that anti-intent cancels the act of the sin. And the Rebbe says that is why a sin has so much of a higher bar, a higher standard of intention. It's so beautiful how the Rebbe spins this thing. Okay, source 8 on the bottom, page 11. We'll see this idea in the Code of Jewish Law. Says the Alter Rebbe in the Code of Jewish Law, even according to those who say that mitzvot do not require intent to fulfill the obligation, but nevertheless, if one explicitly intended not to fulfill their obligation, then they certainly haven't fulfilled it against their will. Okay. But what about a Jew who doesn't say Modani? What happens? So this is assuming that the Jew says Modani every morning. So when you say Modani in the morning, you are creating a relationship with God, and you're at least subconsciously saying, I don't want to be disconnected from God. And that sets the stage for the whole day. Every mitzvah automatically has intent from the morning. And every sin has anti-intent. It's an amazing thing. It sets the Jew for such a model for success. But what about a Jew who doesn't say Modani? A lot of Jews don't say Modani. So what then? Says the Rebbe, something so beautiful, so beautiful. Page 12. That this applies even if a Jew does not say Modani. Says the Rebbe. There's still a point that requires further clarification. The laws that mitzvot don't require intent and that unintended transgressions aren't punishable are true for all Jews. Jewish law doesn't qualify this law. Every Jew, this law applies for. Even those that didn't begin the day with an act of connection to God and didn't even say Modani. So we're creating this whole logic based on the fact that a Jew makes every morning a connection to God and at least subconsciously affirms that they don't want to be disconnected from God. And therefore, mitzvos automatically have intent and there's always anti-intent for sin. But what about Jews who don't say Modani? But Jewish law doesn't qualify this law. It says about this by all Jews. Says the Rebbe, why does the aforementioned difference between positive mitzvahs and transgressions apply to such a Jew as well? You would say this only applies to a Jew who davens every day, who connects to God every single day. Says Modani. What about other Jews? What about all secular Jews who don't say Modani? The Rebbe says even them doesn't matter. It says the Rebbe like this. The truth is that each and every Jew, deep in his soul, wishes to do good. Every single Jew wants to be connected to Hashem, even if they don't say Modani, and even if they don't consciously realize it. Says the Rebbe, this desire may be subconscious, but it is still a practical reality. So it renders the person, quote, occupied in this matter. Just like we said about marriage, that if you spoke about it this morning, that creates the setting that you're occupied in it. And therefore, if you give a ring, we say there's intent, because there has been discussions, you're occupied. Even if a Jew doesn't say Modani, but you are a Jew, you have a Jewish soul, in truth, you want to be connected to God. And therefore, you automatically have the intent that you want to be connected and that you don't want to be disconnected. It's amazing. Says the Rebbe, this can be compared to a law concerning the sacrifices. That even if the Kohanim, who bring sacrifices in the Holy Temple, if they lack the required intent while offering the sacrifices, the rabbinic court imposes the intent upon them. It's an amazing thing. According to Jewish law, the Kohanim who served in the Holy Temple needed to be very intentional. You can't just do your jobs in the Holy Temple just by rote or just, you gotta be very intentional. What happens if a Kohen shows up and says, "Oi, I just did an hour's worth of work and my mind was elsewhere and I was just doing things out of habit. And everything I just did, all my important services in the Holy Temple, I had no intent for it." So he runs to the high court, to the Sanhedrin, to the rabbis, and says, "What do I do?" You know what Jewish law says? The rabbinic court imposes the intent upon him. They say, "No, we rule that you did have intent, even though you didn't have intent. But subconsciously you did have intent." Why do they say that? The Rebbe explains. Since at our core we all wish to follow the instructions of the court, their imposition of intent is effective, and it is considered as if the Kohanim themselves have the proper intent. Because really the Kohen did want to have intent. That was his true desire. And therefore the court, according to Jewish law, could impose that intent and validate all the work that he did and not invalidate it because he didn't have intent. And the Rebbe concludes, it's so beautiful. This is why we're on page 13. This is why mitzvot don't require intent. Because every Jew is considered to be occupied in this matter. When we do a mitzvah, even without intent, our true desire is to devote ourselves to God. That's the truth of every single Jew. As a result, this forges a connection with God. A Jew doesn't have to put an effort. It's there already. It's as if he's been speaking about it. Just like to use the example for marriage. So therefore, when the act is done without any intent, he's there already. And on the flip side, even if a Jew doesn't feel it, deep inside they don't want to be disconnected from God. A Jew doesn't want to sin. So they sin sometimes. They're not connected to their core. But in truth, there's always intention that they don't want to sin. And Rebbe says this is why it's reflected in practical Jewish law. This isn't just a deep mystical concept. This is practical Jewish law. That a mitzvah is so much easier to do than the sin. Because that's a natural space for a Jew. Concludes the Rebbe, the connection is akin to the initial erusin stage of marriage, which is the first stage of marriage. It's called erusin. In Jewish law, marriage is a two-step process. Erusin and then kiddushin. The connection is akin to the initial erusin stage of marriage, and it will eventually lead to the final stage of nisuin, the ultimate completion of the marriage. As the verse states regarding the Jewish people and God in the Messianic era, on that day you shall call me my man and not just my husband. May we merit this speedily in our days. So Rebbe concludes that from every act of a mitzvah the Jew does, it should bring us closer to the coming of Mashiach, when the true bond between the Jew and God is going to be fully completed and consummated. So dear friends, that is our Torah Deep Dive. And first of all, we have, I think this week, maybe more than other weeks, to really see how the Rebbe is taking concepts from Jewish law that are very easy to miss their profundity. You could read it in Jewish law, okay, it's just another law. And the Rebbe is saying, no, this law actually holds a principle for Jewish life. And just in this one little talk, the Rebbe pulled from like 7 different areas of Jewish law. Laws of Passover, laws of marriage, laws of Kohanim, the holy... And the Rebbe showed you how within Jewish law we have the support that a Jew naturally wants to do a mitzvah, and therefore the mitzvah happens even without intent. Because there always is intent. And even though you would think naturally that it's easier, it's more natural for a Jew to do a sin, because we're just regular human people, and we enjoy having good lives, and we enjoy having convenient lives. But the truth is no. The truth is that really a Jew always has anti-intention for the sin. And because of that, it is so much harder for a Jew to actually do a sin that counts. So most sins we do actually don't count. And this is the idea, just to conclude, the Talmud says that just like a pomegranate is filled, you can't, with seeds. Pomegranates don't have any empty space in it. Pomegranates, you can't fit another seed in a pomegranate. So too Jews, every Jew is filled with mitzvahs. Even the greatest sinners of Israel, says the Talmud, is filled with mitzvahs like a pomegranate is filled with seeds. And the Rebbe says, if you really understand the internal makeup of a Jew, you see the truth of this Talmud. So many Jews don't mean to do mitzvahs, but they're getting so many mitzvahs. And sometimes you can look at a Jew and say, oh, they sin so much, but they don't have intent. They don't mean to sin. Maybe they weren't raised religious. Maybe and they're on their own path, they're on their own journey. Are those sins that look like sins? They're the actions of sins, but do they have intent? Are they actually counted as sins? So often not. So this is, we're getting another idea of how the Rebbe always has such good positivity looking at a Jew. Don't look down at a Jew. Realize how every single Jew really is connected, wants to be connected, how many mitzvahs they have, how few sins they have, even when it looks like otherwise. And dear friends, that is a beautiful Torah deep dive from one little verse, from one little element in this week's Torah portion. Like we always do, right? We always do a very, very precision dive into one tiny area of the Torah portion. That's how we do it in this class. And I want to thank you all for joining for such a wonderful class. And God willing, we'll see you all next week. And I want to wish you all a wonderful Shabbos and a wonderful Rosh Chodesh. We're going to have Rosh Chodesh this coming week. And we'll see you all soon. May God bless you all.